Hello, friends. Welcome to Lead to Gold. This is the podcast devoted to discussing all things growth and wellness. And this is part 2 of a 2-part series on why the internet isn't fun anymore. If you haven't listened to part 1, I am just going to tell you right off the bat, you probably should, because we covered a lot of ground over there. And to be entirely honest, I'm a little nervous for today's episode because my notes have never been longer for any episode ever. So hopefully this doesn't turn into a part 3, but we'll see. Before we get into the content and before we kind of just very briefly recap part 1, I just want to go in with the usual podcasty spiel. I want to let you know of a couple of things going on outside of this podcast where you can find me. And that first part is that Lead to Gold is not just a podcast. It's also a blog. So if you have been liking your conversations in the form of sort of a Substack blog type vibe, you can find many, many, many blog posts, over 70 of them, at leadtogold.blog. I would love to see you over there. And in addition to that, if you really just want to stay updated on the latest things that are coming out, the things that are going on with me, I also send out a monthly newsletter, and it is truly only monthly. I send it out right at the start of each new sort of astrological sign. So with it comes a little just like note from me, some things that I've been engaging in lately. I like to share a little media roundup of like what I'm listening to, what I'm watching, just to gab about it. And then I also include a custom playlist for multiple streaming apps. So regardless of where you listen to your music, you can get this playlist, and you'll see the link kind of just directs you to whichever platform you use. And I always try to align those to the astrological season as well. So they're really fun. I really enjoy making these. If you didn't know, I used to be a radio DJ. So this is kind of how I now get to play with that version of myself. And I love sending these out to people. I've heard great things about them. So if you're interested, and if you want a cute little custom monthly playlist along with some other goodies, sign up for my newsletter. If you want to support me, you can go check out my art. I think it's cute and affordable, especially if you like cute little animals and whimsical scenes. You're going to love it. And then obviously, last but not least, I really think the best thing you can ever do for any podcast that you like and want to continue to support is to rate the show wherever you're listening and share it with a friend, especially if you think that friend would like this episode or any others that you have in mind. Okay, that's all. Thank you for listening. And also, if you do none of those things, that's fine too. I'm just really glad you're here. Like so glad that you're here, because I think this conversation that we've been having is so important and definitely needs to be fleshed out a little bit more with people who want to talk about it. I want to actually start with that because I did mention at the end of part 1, if you had listened to it and had any suggestions for what I should cover in part 2, being more of the like solutions-based conversation, I was very curious what listeners were thinking and saying just about their experiences with the internet in general. So I do want to share a couple of thoughts that I got from you guys just to relay that and set the stage for what we're going to get into with the rest of this episode. The word that came up multiple times as to why the internet is not fun anymore was whimsy. Like, I actually saw that in multiple responses. So I thought that was kind of funny, but also extremely true, and definitely part of what we covered in part 1. It's not creative. It's not really built to explore anymore. Like, it's just all very one way, which we'll kind of recap in a minute. One comment in particular says, people care too much about how they're perceived. I want whimsy. And a similar one to that used the same word says that there's no whimsy anymore. It's all just sort of posturing for bragging rights about whatever you're doing. Another one says, My least favorite thing is ads and sponsored posts. I miss being inspired and not convinced to buy 1001 products. These were just a collection of the big ones that I saw, and I want to also then turn this over into, okay, so like what's the solution? And I will be honest, the solutions are what I received in comments, definitely some things that we're going to harp on later in this episode. One says trying to cut down screen time or not use filters, which I think are both excellent and definitely the entryway into some of what we're going to talk about today. One says following as few people as possible and unfollowing anyone who isn't in my close circle. Also fully agree there. And my personal favorite, get off the internet. Bing, bang, boom. So I don't want this conversation to end here. If you have any other thoughts or suggestions or things that you're trying as far as your internet experience in the year of our Lord 2026, please let me know, because this conversation does not stop with the end of this episode. I want to also just say right off the top that this has been something that has followed me throughout pretty much all of my life. Whether I like to admit it or not, the internet kind of is who I am. And to set that stage, I wanted to also read a little bit from a blog post that will be posted in the show notes. I'll just read this and it'll make sense. Okay. I've been chronically online since 2006, almost 20 years, almost 2/3 of my life. Whether it was watching music videos or reading the forums of Yahoo Answers, a cesspool, by the way, I've found this alternate world as expansive and enchanting as anyone else in those early days. I often daydream about collecting stories from my friends about their wackiest, most TMI stories from the 2000s internet and turning them into a coffee table book to keep as a relic of simpler times. But unfortunately, the fantasy was short-lived. Most of my cognizant internet experience has been one of shame, of knowing I should be somewhere else, but never being able to pull away. Even in that blog post from 2021, I lamented about this very problem. I regret to inform those younger versions of me that the problem has only gotten worse. Now, along with the existential threats of what I outlined earlier in this post, I also face my own inner dissonance of wanting to be done with it forever while also wanting to share this work with a wider audience. To rub salt in the wound, trying to regularly post to Lead to Gold worsened the amount of time I would spend distracted by the rest of the platform. But I've been sold the idea, as have millions of others, that social media is the only way to build a brand. Paying for ads and curating SEO is the only way to ensure new people find the content. And content, of course, is the only way to share my gifts. I know this isn't true, but I also find it so hard to believe it could be done organically via word of mouth, via real life community or networking. And then I reached an impasse. In September of 2025, Charlie Kirk was assassinated and became an immediate martyr. People had a lot to say and share about this online, as I'm sure you remember, and the majority of them were non-celebrities, normal people with small or even private platforms. I remember one of my colleagues messaged the group chat for my department of English teachers, warning us to be extremely cautious when sharing any political opinions online, because a colleague at a neighboring school, who I did not know, had been blasted on a popular right-wing Facebook page for sharing less than empathetic views about the situation. Nothing she said was violent or even derogatory toward Kirk. She merely pointed out the fact that no one seemed to be talking about the school shooting that had happened the very same day. And with a post garnering thousands of comments, she was berated, bullied, doxxed, and handed death threats. They posted photos of her children. This changed everything. This shattered whatever may have been left of the rose-colored glasses I was wearing for the internet. For whatever quote-unquote duty I had to be unafraid of sharing my opinion, unafraid of posting reels and quote-unquote being cringe and seeking to gain a following. Too much is at stake now. Too much of my real life is being put on the line. I had to reorient and figure out what would actually work for me in order to continue any semblance of this passion for writing, for sharing, for building community online and off. I would like to say that that is the crux of why this particular issue has become so important for me to discuss on Lead to Gold. And some of you also may just be wondering, it's a wellness podcast, but what does the internet have to do with that? Well, I'd argue almost everything. I think the Venn diagram is just about a circle. I also, before we really get into the final piece of this puzzle, the solutions, I want to recap all of the things very, very briefly that we talked about in part 1. Again, if you haven't listened to it, I think you should listen to the full episode, but just to ground us in this conversation for today, some of the main things that I wanted to get at were beyond the whole spiel of like, oh, we just all need to go touch grass. We're all too addicted to our phones. Kids are like brain rotted and whatever. It goes a lot deeper than that. And it goes so deep, in fact, that I don't think you can really escape the reality anymore that the internet in and of itself and like the largest social media platforms that people are using have also kind of become the Venn diagram is a circle. Like the internet is social media. I know that's not exactly really true, but it very much feels that way. People equivalate the internet to social media, myself included. And I think that in and of itself raises a lot of potential red flags. And the people who own these companies are so incomprehensibly wealthy and powerful. And there's very, very little incentive for them to stop all of the harmful practices that they have accrued throughout the years. Some of those practices are the fact that the old internet of my childhood used to be really messy and kind of confusing, but very exploratory. And now it is completely optimized. You have very few options for what you're able to really see. And anything that is not honestly owned by a huge brand or a huge corporation or a CEO with billions and billions of dollars, it's just not really going to find its way to you. It's very hard to find those kind of niche spaces on the internet nowadays unless you are already a part of them. It also used to be a meeting ground, and now it's a ghost town. It used to be a place to socialize, and now the dead internet theory is unfortunately realer than I would like to admit that it is, or that I would like to think about, you know? It used to be a place for the people, like the people who actively used the internet were the ones building the internet and making it into something greater, until some of those people in some of those spaces got a little too big for their britches, and now it's all commodified. I think the last piece of this, and probably arguably a big one that we're going to continue to talk about today, is that it used to be largely free. Obviously, you would have to pay to have an internet connection, but using those services on the internet, it was free. It was largely free. It was largely, not completely overrun with advertisements, but now it is all for rent. It is extremely and exceedingly difficult to own anything that you do or have or share on the internet. And if you do want to share things, you are widely incentivized to monetize it because you almost have to. What do we do about all of this? And why is this a deeper problem than just simply needing to go touch grass? That is what we're going to get into today. I really did end that episode trying to touch on what this internet culture of the mid 2020s ultimately does to us. And while I think that conversation has been going on for a long time, we know that it has connections to heightened anxiety and depression. We know that self-consciousness is heightened when you're on social media, constantly comparing yourself to other people and other people's lives. That's all kind of old news, and I'm not saying it's not important. It's just not really where I wanted to land with this conversation. I think beyond those things, which are obviously still problems, there's also the sort of sobering fact that we're settling into now, where we realize this thing that used to be, like we talked about a minute ago, highly social, isn't really that social anymore. And even if you are still using social media spaces to talk to your friends, it's different. It's like you're sending them something. It's not really a message coming from you, because there's other ways you could get that message across to them. It's like you're using the platform to send them something that you saw from the platform from somebody else. It's not an authentic communication tool anymore. And in addition to that, the culture of the internet, which we are 1000% getting into in a little bit, is urgency. It breeds urgency. It breeds perfectionism. It breeds optimization. We feel like we have to uphold these standards in ourselves because we equivalate ourselves with our online personas, even though they are not the same thing. That breeds a lack of presence, whether that's with other people or with ourselves in our own bodies. So, we have set the stage for what has become a partial solution to this problem. And you probably guessed what we're going to be talking about because it's in the title. But I do want to spend a good time here talking about the Analogue movement. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, I will explain all of it. It is an interesting thing to me, and I want to say from the top here that I do not think that the Analogue movement is a bad thing. Please don't get it twisted. It's not bad. It's not like an evil, horrible, like anti-solution or worsening of the problem of the lack of fun on the internet. That is not what I'm saying here. I do think that initially the core idea of it was headed in the right direction, but it hasn't really ended up being the net positive that I think people wanted it to be. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, the Analogue movement is in a way kind of what it sounds like, but also not really. When we think about analog technology as a definition, we're talking about anything that does not use a computer to operate. Maybe it's battery powered, maybe it's electric, whatever, but it's not using a computer system in any way. So already off the bat, some people's choice of analog stuff to do isn't really following that definition, but that's neither here nor there. The Analogue movement in and of itself is a strategy for people to get off of their phones and to stop doom scrolling, to stop wasting their days away on social media mostly, by way of finding other activities to do. So you can think of pretty much any other activity that kept people busy before the internet was a thing, and that's going to fit into the analog trend, the analog movement. So reading can be part of that. Watercoloring, collecting records, watching movies on a DVD rather than streaming them, playing a Game Boy, like having that handheld old version of a game that does not require an internet connection, drawing, doodling, going for a walk with a Walkman. Any of these things can be considered an analog activity. But I think the point of it, at least as far as the trend goes, is that it has to be something kind of handheld. So gardening, cooking, decorating your house, like those things might not necessarily be considered an analog quote unquote activity. Those are more starting to get along the lines of like chores, if you will. I don't really know where the line is, but I know what the trend looks like, and it usually includes, or I should say it always includes, something handheld. But the point of it is to give yourself something to do with your hands so that you're not on your phone. And again, on its face, this probably sounds like a great, wonderful, wholesome trend. And in a lot of ways, it is. I actually really like that people are starting to gravitate toward this. But there's a lot of nuances to the conversation, and there are also a lot of trends that go along with the analog movement that go a little deeper and a little more extreme than just simply like finding other activities to do. There's also this thing called friction maxing, where the whole idea is kind of just to inconvenience yourself on purpose so that you get used to not getting the things that you want immediately. And again, on its face, great idea. I think we could all use a little bit of quote unquote friction maxing. But what that really is just like, instead of using DoorDash, you're going to go to the restaurant and pick up your food. Like, I don't mean to sound pessimistic about it, but this is the kind of thing that like a lot of people are still doing and never really moved away from doing. Like, I have never ever used DoorDash ever, and I probably never will. I've seen videos of people timing themselves for an hour and then just showing the footage in like sped up motion so that it only takes a minute to show, where they just literally sit and do nothing for an hour. Like, they are staring into space or staring out a window for an hour just to quote unquote fix their attention span. It's kind of funny, honestly, and kind of wholesome, but saying it out loud just makes me realize how far we've come, how far we have strayed from God. You know, it's just like, what are we doing? Like, it's crazy that people need to do this or feel the need to do this. And I'll say here as well that it really does do some good, these analog movement trends, because yeah, we probably do need to fix our attention spans. And maybe the solution to that, or the way to prove, hey, maybe I'm not as bad as I thought, is to stare out the window for an hour. Like, sure, if you want to do that, go ahead and do that. I also think it's great to give yourself alternative activities to do that you genuinely enjoy doing, so that you can sort of experience the same leisure time and downtime, but it's spent doing something better for your brain and better for your mental health ultimately. Here's another thing. I do think we're going to get more into this in a minute, but one absolute problem of the modern internet that the analog movement solves is that lack of ownership. In part one, we spent so much time talking about how awful it is that we really can't own anything anymore on the internet. Everything is streaming. Everything is subscription based. You have to pay once a month or once a year or however many times, and you're never fully going to have access to that thing. It's going to disappear someday. So it's really nice to be able to claim ownership on your record collection or your set of watercolors or the books on your bookshelf. This is exactly what the analog movement fixes. And that is 1000% a step in the right direction. Maybe you also do ultimately spend less time on your phone, which is kind of the goal for the entire movement itself. But we're going to talk about the commodification of the analog movement. You probably already knew I was going here, but unfortunately, if anything is ever a trend, if anything ever does pick up speed with a group of people, it is going to get commodified. There's no way around it. So just like any other trend, that is what has happened to the analog movement. You'll see influencers who are like, what's in my analog bag? And then affiliate links for every single item that is in that bag. And I don't really know if the majority of people who are trying to do this actually have a physical bag that they put all of this stuff in, but the trend would make you think that they do. Everything analog is supposed to be in this big bag that goes with you everywhere so that you're not on your phone. But usually the videos that are promoting having an analog bag are the same videos that are going to post the links for all of the things that they use in their descriptions so that you go out and buy more things that you don't need to fill up this bag that you also probably don't need or already have on hand. Here's, again, the problem of the internet is that everything eventually becomes something to be sold. But the entire actual purpose of the analog movement is to get away from that space. So it's very counterintuitive to have these influencers making videos and content about their analog lifestyles just to then go and post them and get a bajillion responses to them and then make more videos about them. You know, it's an endless cycle. Like, you're not actually getting offline at all. those people are the most online people. And again, I'm not even saying that like I want to throw shade at specific influencers that are doing this. It's just that it defeats the purpose. Your analog movement, your own personal journey to going offline more, does not need to be aesthetic. In fact, it really shouldn't be for anybody else. It, again, defeats the entire purpose of it. To spend less time on your phone is a private practice. I can absolutely make a case for getting into these quote unquote analog activities that breed socialization, right? Like you could start a book club, or you could meet a friend in the park and watercolor the scene that you're looking at. That's amazing. That's a great use of your analog hobbies. But that is an in real life interaction. Again, to make content about your analog movement is defeating the purpose of going analog in the first place. So here's what I ultimately want to say about that, because this is sort of the way that the Gen Z internet has viewed the solution of why the internet isn't fun anymore and why we need to make it more fun and how we're going to do that. This part of it is not actually even solving that at all. It's actually just saying like, okay, the internet isn't fun anymore, so let's get off of it. And maybe that is the solution for some people. It definitely is not a bad thing to be a little less online. That is not at all what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that if the problems of the internet are what we have mentioned in part 1, the lack of expression, the lack of creativity, or the loss of it, the loss of ownership or power over what happens to the internet, the ability to make changes or to explore new grounds of the internet, because we certainly have a lot of a harder time doing that nowadays. We need solutions for those problems. The only thing that the analog movement solves is ownership. I also forgot to mention like the weird antisocial behavior, right? Like the internet is a weirdly not social place. It's social, but it's like, this isn't the kind of socialization I want to be doing in my real life. This isn't mimicking beneficial human connection. This has kind of become a weird perverted version of it. So again, the solutions that we come up with for why the internet sucks now and why it's not fun anymore needs to address those things. I'm going to kind of step off of the analog movement track at this point. I want to just end on the fact that like, yeah, that movement does kind of on its face solve some of those problems, but rather than solving it, I'm going to say it's kind of providing a band-aid for it. It also still assumes one very, very important thing that I now want to get into, which is the fact that if you are replacing your scrolling addiction with other handheld activities, that assumes and tells your body and your nervous system that you still need to be productive in some way. So you're not just getting off the internet. You are still getting off one thing and just going straight to another thing to bide your time, to fill up your time, so that we have literally 0 seconds in the day from the moment we wake up to the moment we go back to bed where we are not doing anything. And the internet optimization has become our own personal problem. Like, we now have to also be optimized, which we talked a little bit about a few minutes ago. Like, if we buy into an online life, which most of us have to, if we have jobs, most of our jobs are at least partially managed online. I'm thinking things like email and communications between colleagues. We have to attach ourselves at least a little bit to this online world. And because of that, we are expected to be fast at whatever tasks need to get done. We are expected to be as efficient as the systems that we use on this platform. We have to be available, which is a conversation people have been having for a long time. Like, it sucks to have the expectation of being available at all times. And we have to constantly prove our worth. right? Because if some other machine or some other thing can do it better than us, then what's the point of having us around? That will probably get into a much bigger conversation about AI and optimization that I don't really want to get into today. But in general, I think in a word, if I had to sum all of this conversation up into one word, it would be that the internet isn't fun because it is exhausting. It used to be exploratory and weird, but now it is just exhausting. And it's exhausting to try to exist in both spaces at once. Like having an offline life and an online life, that doesn't even exist for a lot of people anymore. They are intertwined. For young people, for my students, there is no difference. And that feels weird and that feels kind of scary. But I do think regardless of the person, that reality is exhausting because our anatomy, like our brains are not able to really comprehend that and live like that. There's going to be cognitive dissonance. There's going to be a struggle there. To be human is to be idle sometimes, I think. And that doesn't just mean like sleeping or taking naps. I mean, I think it is literally within our physiology that we need to just be idle. This makes me think of a blog post that I did a very, very, very long time ago where I was talking about a book that I actually kind of hate, Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And the reason I wrote about it was because my 9th graders had just read sections of it and they needed to write an essay. That was basically the lesson that we were working up to, was like an argumentative essay. One of the prompts that I ended up giving them once they had read the certain sections of the book was about a section on farmers, like farmers from the working days, like a long time ago. So I'm going to read some of this to you because I do think you need the context in order for what I'm about to say to make sense. There was a section of the book that really got my attention, and this is the quote from the book. All of us, for example, are descended at some point from hunter-gatherers, and many hunter-gatherers, by all accounts, had a pretty leisurely life. All told, Ikung, one of the last hunter-gatherer tribes in the world today, men and women work no more than about 12 to 19 hours a week, with the balance of time spent dancing, entertaining, and visiting family and friends. That's at most 1,000 hours of work a year. Or consider the life of a peasant in 18th century Europe. Men and women in those days probably worked from dawn to noon 200 days a year, which works out to about 1,200 hours of work annually. During harvest or spring planting, the day might be longer. In the winter, much less. In The Discovery of France, the historian Graham Robb argues that peasant life in a country like France, even well into the 19th century, was essentially brief episodes of work followed by long periods of, keyword, idleness. Gladwell goes on to further discuss the main topic of this chapter, which was Chinese rice paddy farmers and how their average amount of work per year totaled over 3,000 hours, well over twice that of the Ikung, the French, or other seasonal workers' cultures. He centered the conversation around how hard these particular farmers worked and how this equates to, the reader comes to find, Asians being better at math than other cultures or races for the sole purpose that they were more willing to try. Look, I have a lot of problems with this book. That's one of them. And that's not really what I wanted to get into. What I wanted to get into was the prompt that I gave the kids, which was essentially, in today's culture, should we focus more on hard work or leisure? If I had to write this essay, I know I would favor the side of leisure. Western work culture, as we know, is intense. Comparing the modern work week of the US to those mentioned in the book, any person with a full-time job can be expected to work anywhere from 2,000 to 2,400 hours in a year, using just like a little quick math. We're nestled somewhere in between those farmers from the past, which may sound like a good sweet spot, but if you toss in the modern working conditions, which have hardly changed over those centuries, the high expectations, the unpaid overtime, the incredibly wide disparities in pay scales among different careers. Consider the markers of late era capitalism we're under, and we have a completely different story on our hands with this. What I'm hoping to lean in toward in talking about this is that we do, I think, put way too much emphasis on like pushing ourselves to perform, to produce, to perfect, especially when it comes into contact with the system of the internet. Like, we have blended these two worlds, our own inner world and that inner working of the internet, into, again, sort of this one thing. I keep coming back to this Venn diagram visual as we talk about this. And we are not machines. Like, no matter how badly we or our bosses or our workplaces or our structures or the internet or the systems want us to be, we are not machines. We are human. We should absolutely still be making time for dancing and entertaining and visiting family and socializing. And you might be thinking, well, like, yeah, we do. Like, I still go out to party, I still club, I still do whatever. I mean, we go to these things. We do still make time for it. But what I fear is happening more, and as we continue to push ourselves toward that whatever vague end goal of optimization that we have, is that we are stretched so thin by the end of that night or by the end of that work week that we become too exhausted to even enjoy these activities fully and presently. You know, like, we don't have the wherewithal to go to the concert or go out to drinks with friends and really be there 100% without still looking at our phone for like work emails that we missed, or like needing to check something, needing to go on social media. It all comes back to like, wait, but I should be doing something else. That is the feeling that we have now, that idleness is just so uncomfortable. It's so hard for us to do because we have been conditioned for all of our lives with the internet that we need to adhere to somebody else's whims. And that's really the crux of the problem. I want to name why this is so painful, and I want to also use that word painful because I think it is the most accurate descriptor. We are not used to sitting with ourselves anymore. And again, even this is kind of a moot point. Like, I know that people have been talking about this for a really long time, but we haven't seemed to figure it out yet. For how much it has been a big conversation in wellness spaces, I don't think we've figured it out because people are still so afraid to do it. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know what it's going to feel like. We're scared of what it's going to feel like. And that makes sense because if you just think about it like this, okay, there's this constant fire going inside of each of us. I'm using this as kind of a metaphor, but I think it's a nice visual. We always have like a pilot light on, right? We always have like a little inner flame going. And if that fire doesn't have any fuel, right? Like the notifications that you have to check, the emails that you have to answer, the social media feed that's going to keep you occupied for an hour or two. If it doesn't have those things, if it doesn't have the distractions, if it doesn't have the analog bag, then what can it burn? It gets to a point where if you're alone by yourself and you're alone with your thoughts and you're not really doing much and you're not keeping yourself busy, it's going to start burning that like dry brush of your own thoughts. And that is painful. That's uncomfortable. That sucks. But it's not a bad thing. I promise you that. It's not a bad thing. When you first start to strip away whatever the distractions are, and that would be the phone, the notebook, the planner, the independent reading book for teacher lingo in this little conversation. Sorry I called it that, but you know what I mean? Like the book that you're trying to read. Even this podcast or any podcast, like when you put all of those things to the side and God forbid you eat dinner silently at the table without looking at a screen, you're not gonna find peace at first. you're going to feel anxious. You're going to feel like, oh God, like, oh, I need noise. I need something. I need, And that's where the conversation comes in so highly that like we are addicted to this stuff. I know that's been a long time conversation. I know there are people who don't really necessarily agree with that. But that's where I start to think, okay, like this is an addiction. I'd be lying to you all if I said that I don't routinely make my dinner, walk my ass upstairs where my TV is, the one TV in my house, and I turn on YouTube. Like, please, I do it too. I do it all the time. But the silence is loud, right? We've spent years and maybe lifetimes, maybe our entire life, numbing the silence with something, like literally taking a pacifier to it. And when we stop, that weird silence is going to start talking back to us. We're going to have to start confronting things that we either forgot about or wanted to forget about. The things that we've been outrunning with that so-called productivity. And as somebody who, you know, I would consider myself to be a person that does kind of want to have constant output. I'm always busy. I like to keep myself busy. That kind of brain is wired to think that anything less than constant production is failure. Idleness is feeling a lot more like a defecting from my own potential than it is like something that's good for me. And if you find yourself in the same boat, I'd be willing to bet that you're also the type of person who feels like if I sit still, I am wasting my potential. If I gather my thoughts, if I literally sit alone by myself and just see what's going on in here, I'm wasting my time. I could be doing something else. I should be doing something else. But I'm going to argue, and this is really ultimately where I want to conclude with this entire idea. We'll get back to the internet in a minute, but right now we're out of it. This is probably the best thing you can do for yourself. This is probably on the personal end of solutions to the internet problem. This is the best thing that you can learn how to do. This is the solution to the problems of the internet, because your thoughts, your inner world, that is where the real expression and creativity and power come from. It takes time, and it takes that extremely difficult learning curve time period where it really does just feel like anxiety and like boredom, like extreme boredom. It's like an itch that you can't scratch. It's gonna take time to get over that feeling. But if you can get to the other side, and if you can start to get used to being with yourself and being with your thoughts, that's where your expression comes back. That's where you start to form your own ideas again. And it's not stuff that you're just regurgitating from other creators that you follow. That's where you're going to start to find your own voice again, because the only thing you can listen to is your voice. You have nothing else going on in there, right? So that is the personal goal. And I know that in this entire conversation, we've strayed a little bit away from like making the internet fun again. Here's where I'll give maybe the negative Nancy take. And this is just my personal take, but I don't feel amazing about the future of the internet. I don't necessarily think it's going to ever be fun again. I think there will be pockets where there is still that expression and people can still gather in an authentic way. But as the landscape of ownership, and I'm talking like big players, the people that actually really do own these internet spaces, I think as long as they are incentivized to keep it the way it is, and they are, and we'll talk about that in a minute, it's not necessarily going to get better. So the personal solution, the individual solution to the problems that have been created is to be able to get comfortable with ourselves and to be able to become unmarketable. That's going to almost even be a harder thing potentially. That's yet another problem of this landscape that we have been conditioned our entire lives to do. And I'll even argue that this is a problem that has spanned several generations now. As long as we have had televised digital advertisements, this has been a problem. So what I mean when I say we want to try as best as we can to become unmarketable, what I mean is we need to approach the things that we see on the internet with like the heftiest dose of skepticism. We can't just look at an advertisement or at what somebody's life looks like even and take it at its face value. I'm not trying to brag on myself, but I would like to say I think my parents set me up really well for this one because I have always approached media with pretty extreme skepticism. I don't believe things at face value. I don't immediately look at something and want it or feel jealousy toward it. But that is easier to say than it actually is to live out. And yeah, yet again, like I would be lying to you if I said that I've never got by an Instagram advertisement that looked better than it actually was. I think we've all been there, you know? But just to go more practical with this piece of it, I do think that the comparison game is what gets a lot of us in trouble. And if that is something that you do deeply struggle with, it might be more beneficial to actually work toward getting off of the internet more than it would be to like push yourself to not fall for it. That's a really, really hard thing to unlearn. It's almost easier, in my opinion, to just remove yourself from the situations in which you're going to play the comparison game than to train yourself to not play the comparison game. Hope that makes sense. In general, I don't think that the goal here is necessarily to get off of the internet. The internet isn't fun anymore, sure, but it still has its benefits. And I think most people would agree with that. In the limited spaces that there are, it is still social. I think that those spaces are becoming smaller and more exclusive. Like we're going to have more genuine connection through things like group chats and Patreon subscription accounts. Like if you frequent anybody that you are a paid subscriber to, they usually have these private chats where people can talk. Those are more likely to be real people, frankly. I mentioned this in part 1, but a lot of the fun of social media was that our friends, like our actual friends that we knew in real life, used to post. And now that's widely becoming extinct because the internet and particularly social media is not so much for seeing what our friends are doing anymore, so much as it's seeing what creators and influencers and celebrities are doing. So the incentive has weakened to just post yourself and post the casual things that you normally would have. So obviously, yes, that makes it less fun, but that doesn't mean that your friends have disappeared off of the platform. It just kind of goes back to what I said earlier about, you know, your conversations with your IRL friends are probably going to be more meaningful IRL. They're not going to be all that interesting or helpful or beneficial online because you could hopefully hypothetically just see them or at the very least FaceTime them. What it is good for socially is building community, which is a reason why I have always wanted to continue to build Led to Gold. Like this feels like such an opportune space to meet people that I would never actually meet in my real life who have the same values as I do. And I think if you are in the fortunate position of having a wider platform or being able to reach more people, that is 1000% a benefit of social media and the internet, is that you are effectively connected to anybody that is also actively using the internet. Like, you can get in touch with anybody. You can learn anything. You can figure out what's going on the other side of the world. I know none of this is new. It's just really, honestly, when you step back and think about how insane that is compared to even 20 years ago, like, it's kind of incomprehensible how much we have been able to achieve and how much growth we have experienced as a species. I'm being very serious about that in such a short time frame. Now, that's also a little scary, but that's not what this conversation is for. I think there are so many benefits, and there are so many reasons why the concept of the internet is wonderful and we shouldn't abandon it. The personal goals that we just discussed, I think, should be intended for while the internet sucks and while it is a less fun place to hang out and be in, let's focus on improving this in our own lives. But if we want the solution of the internet sucking and we want it to get better, that's what I want to talk about right now. Because again, I don't think that the goal is necessarily to like get offline. The internet is not dead and it's not dying. It's not going anywhere, for lack of a better phrase. It's not going to disappear. We've seen what happens when governments try to strip the internet from their citizens. We've seen what happens, and we know that it does not go well. So I don't think that that is going to be in our future. And I think that there are way too many billionaires, frankly, invested in keeping it alive, for better or worse, mostly for worse. But if we want the internet that we used to have, or if we at least want some improved version of what we have now, I think about the fact that there is, at this moment in time, very little incentive to change anything, but the people can absolutely make those changes if we are loud enough about them, if we ask for them fervently enough. I always think back to the end of the movie The Social Dilemma, which is, to be quite honest, one of the biggest inspirations for me getting so passionate and involved in learning about media literacy and all of this internet discourse. I'm going to read a little bit of the transcript from the end of the movie because I just don't think that there's any way that I could put it into words better. But as they get into the last section of the movie, just for context, the sort of climax ends up in this place where it's like, we have seen what political polarization and disinformation that have almost 100% been driven by social media platforms. We've seen what that has done to the world, and it is not good. So the movie sort of climaxes on this, like, okay, it's kind of reaching up apocalyptic territory. What are we going to do about this? And here's where they sort of present the solution. So again, just going to read a couple of different sections from this transcript. I don't think these guys or the creators of these platforms set out to be evil. It's just the business model that has a problem. You could shut down the service and destroy whatever it is, maybe $20 billion of shareholder value, and get sued, but you can't in practice put the genie back in the bottle. You can make some tweaks, but at the end of the day, you have to grow revenue and usage as a business, quarter over quarter. The bigger it gets, the harder it is for anyone to change. What I see is a bunch of people who are trapped by a business model, an economic incentive, and shareholder pressure that makes it almost impossible to do anything else. I think we need to accept that it's okay for companies to be focused on making money. What's not okay is when there's no regulation, no rules, and no competition, and the companies are acting as a sort of de facto government. And then they're saying, well, we can regulate ourselves, but that's just a lie. That's ridiculous. Financial incentives kind of run the world, so any solution to this problem has to realign the financial incentives. There's no fiscal reason for these companies to change, and that's why we need regulation. We could tax data collection and processing the same way that you would, for example, pay your water bill by monitoring the amount of water that you use. You tax these companies on the data assets that they have. It gives them a fiscal reason to not acquire every piece of data on the planet. The law runs way behind on these things, but what I know is that the current situation exists not for the protection of users, but for the protection of the rights and privileges of the gigantic, incredibly wealthy companies. Are we always going to defer to the richest, most powerful people? Or are we ever going to say, there are times when there is a national interest. There are times when the interests of people, of users, is actually more important than the profits of somebody who's already a billionaire. The markets undermine democracy and they undermine freedom, and they should be outlawed. This is not a radical proposal. There are other markets that we outlaw. This is my absolute favorite. And it's kind of long, but it's really good, so stick with me here. We live in a world in which a tree is worth more financially dead than alive. In a world in which a whale is worth more dead than alive. For so long as our economy works in that way and corporations go unregulated, they're going to continue to destroy trees, to kill whales, to mine the earth, and to continue to pull oil out of the ground, even though we know it's destroying the planet and we know that it's going to leave a worse world for future generations. This is short-term thinking based on a religion of profit at all costs, as if somehow, magically, each corporation acting in its selfish interest is going to produce the best result. This has been affecting the environment for a long time. What's frightening and what hopefully is the last straw that will make us wake up as a civilization is how flawed this theory has been in the first place. To see that now we are the tree, we are the whale, our attention can be mined, and we are more profitable to a corporation if we're spending time staring at a screen, staring at an ad, than if we're spending that time living our life in a rich way. Fucking powerful, if you ask me. So here's where I want to end. Maybe personally we decide that the internet is a sinking ship and we personally detach. In which case, see the personal goals, right? That's the thing that for the moment we can absolutely focus on. But if we want a future with this thing, and I do, because I think, as I've hopefully demonstrated, there is a lot of good that can come from it. We need to keep being loud. We need to go forth with these regulations. And for the amount of people that are out on the internet right now complaining about how the internet isn't fun anymore, there's so many people out there saying this and doing this and embodying this belief. There's so many people getting involved in the analog movement. I'd be willing to bet 1 in 200 of those people have actually done anything political. And I'm talking like keeping up with the bills that are currently being introduced, keeping up with the regulations, knowing the language in these regulations, knowing where they're coming from, knowing the people to get behind that are actually trying to move forward in bettering our internet landscape. If all of these people were able to back themselves up with even just one imparting knowledge piece on, okay, the internet isn't fun anymore. Here's what to do. Here's what you can do right now. Then we would be in a better position. What's ultimately going to fix the internet is a lot of voices and a lot of action toward regulations. And when I say regulations, I know that that is a broad scope, but who would I be if I did not give us one of those potential tasks to do? I am a woman of my word, okay? So as I am one of these people yapping on the internet about how the internet isn't fun anymore, let's do something about that. While I would like to take a little bit more time than I have unfortunately given myself today to give you actual tangible regulations to follow up with and respond to and add your thoughts to, I will be looking for them, and when I have them, I will put them in the show notes below. So maybe they're there depending on how long it is until you're listening to this episode. But check for that. For right now, for while this episode is coming out, I have a really cool, I won't call it a database, but a really cool forum that I found that does help reintegrate us back onto that sort of like fun internet. So this is coming from a dated website called sadgirl.online, and it really is just a link to surf the web, but surf the web like we used to. So there's this sort of random site generator on this website, and it gives you a list of several of them. I'm telling you, I spent 5 minutes looking through just a few of these, and I've already found so many great new websites that I 1000% will be using. One of them is called fallingfruit.org, and it is a map where people literally just post the food that they can find for free out in the open in the wild in that area. So I'm looking at my neighborhood and the amount of locations where in a couple of weeks I can go and just get mulberries for free because it's on public property. And now I forever know where to get mulberries and pawpaws and staghorn sumac. Like, there's so much here. Crab apples. It's amazing. Spice bush. There's all kinds of stuff. Now I know where to go find it. So that's just one of probably literally tens of thousands that you can find on sadgirl.online. I'm going to link that in the show notes for you, and stay tuned. Stay on the lookout for another couple of resources for AI regulations, for data collection regulations, anything political that you can get involved in and should try to get involved in. All right. Let's finish today's episode with a little game of We're Not Really Strangers, and we will cap it all off. Thank you again so much for being here. I know that this two-parter has been a little bit long-winded, but again, I just think it is so critically important to discuss. So thank you for sticking it out with me if you made it this far. Let's unwind. Let's put a little closer on this one. Oh, I like this one. Okay. What's something you can say no to this week to prioritize your mental health? And what's something you can say yes to? I feel like saying no to overextending myself at work this week would be a really great thing for me to try to do. I have definitely gotten to the point in the school year where I'm kind of over it, and that's nobody's fault. It's just that we're getting to the end of the school year and I'm over it. That's it. It's as simple as that. And I feel like sometimes I try to overextend and like keep myself at work, keep myself working after I come home, like doing all sorts of things to kind of like continue the cycle of like making sure I'm staying on top of things, but it never really actually helps me do that. So I think rather than maybe verbally saying no to somebody, I could just be like, hey man, I'm not working after I get home this week. I'm just not doing it. I'm not going to grade at home. I'm not going to sit at my computer for an extra 5 hours. I'm just not going to do that. And something I can say yes to is, I already know the answer to this one very easily, getting up earlier and going to the gym, because I have been very steadily improving my habit with doing that. The getting up early part is still, and probably always will be, the hardest part for me, but getting at least to the gym has gotten a lot better in the past few weeks. So I'm going to call that a win, and I'm going to try to continue the trend and try to get out there more regularly earlier in the day. And if I can't get that far, then just making it there at all at any point during the day will be enough for me. But definitely saying yes to going to a workout a couple of times this week. That's going to be a big yes. What about you? Say no to something and say yes to something. And hopefully that's going to help out your mental health. All right, y'all. I love you so much. Again, as always, if you enjoyed this episode, let me know. Share your thoughts, share your feedback, share your criticism. I want to know every thought that's coming into your sweet, sweet little brain so that I know how to improve after episodes in the future. And I ultimately just want to thank you so much for being here, as always. And I will see you next week on the blog and in another 2 weeks back here on the podcast. Bye.